Women, Technical Advisor to the Vice President of Nigeria on Women, Youth Engagement and Impact. Next up, we have Isabella Niagualar, Human Rights Lawyer, Harvard Law School, Henningsen Human Rights Fellow. Please welcome. Next up, we have Nicole Ding, Senior Vice President for Relations and Advisor, NATO Association of Canada and UNFPCY. Thank you for being here. And lastly, we have Jorge Valderrabano, Advocacy Officer at Agora. Thank you. Now, the panel title has changed a little bit, but we will be talking about scaling the world program of action for youth and also practical strategies for peace and security. And lastly, we have to welcome our amazing moderator, Jaya Berry, who is part of IYC team. So the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're so thrilled to have you back for day 2 of IYC. I'm excited to welcome you to this important dialogue regarding the World Program of Action for Youth and the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, which are both notable efforts working to improve youth's position in international governance and policy, protect youth, and ensure peace throughout the globe. For context, I will give you some information about both of these efforts. The WPAY was adopted by the General Assembly in 1995. It provides recommendations on how the world can be improved for everyone, including youth. They have 15 categories for action listed, from everything including education, health, poverty, and a notable significance on youth empowerment and youth voices being incorporated into the international sphere. It outlines the issues at hand and provides national, regional, and international advisories to improve youth's position and incorporate youth into decision making. And even amidst these efforts, it must be regarded as a first step and not a final goal. So, keeping that in mind through this session, it's important to expand it, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Regarding the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, it stems from the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 2250, which was adopted in 2015. It acknowledges youth's positive role in conflict prevention, resolution, and post-conflict peace building, and it urges countries to include youth in all aspects of the peace resolution process. It has a focus on 5 key pillars related to youth's role in conflict and moving towards peace, including participation, prevention, partnerships, and disengagement and reintegration. It aims to empower and protect youth and support meaningful reintegration for those previously involved in conflict, and it overall calls for investing in youth and recognizing their potential to build a better and more sustainable future and to cater to their willingness to think big and long-term in international policy. So, keeping that background in mind and both agendas in mind, I'd like to give our speakers an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and provide some background on who they are and what they do.
Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa Chasman. I'm the founder and executive director of Unite 2030. We work with young people just like yourselves from all around the world, about 52,000 of them from 195 countries, and we help them develop solutions to the world's biggest challenges. So excited to be here in a room full of passionate, enthusiastic young people.
Hi everyone, my name is Isabella Leal. I am a Mexican attorney. I just recently concluded my LLM studies at Harvard Law School, focused on international law, international human rights, and negotiation. I'm currently the Henningsen Fellow, which is a human rights fellowship working in northern Mexico with the immigrant communities within Mexico, in the northern border essentially. I'm also a special projects coordinator at Facultad de Derecho de Monterrey, which is a law school in Mexico. And my profile is mostly academic at the moment, but I have worked in advocacy, activism, mainly oriented in gender equality and environmental matters, most notably one in which we were able to, through amicus curiae and interventions with the Supreme Court, eliminate the tax for menstrual hygiene products in Mexico, and another process in which we have avoided the removal of 26 kilometer squares. Sorry for those who speak in miles, I don't. 26 kilometer squares of trees within a river bench in our city for the FIFA 2026 roads that are being built in my city, Monterrey, for the World Cup.
Hello, my name is Hawa Newman. I currently work with the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as a technical advisor on women, youth engagement and impact. I also run a social impact initiative, which is called the Inspire for Impact Initiative, where we work with women and youth.
Hi everyone, I am Nicole and I'm currently in international political profession, serving as the Senior Vice President of Relations at NATO Association of Canada and Young NATO Canada under YADA International. I'm also serving at CCYI, Canadian Council of Young Feminists for Senator Eric, as well as World Economic Forum, Toronto Global Achievers as a Vice Curator. Most of my work revolves around youth and women in peace building and security, upholding international legal order, implementation of rule of law, and human rights efforts. Thank you so much.
Hi people, can you hear me? Yes? Is the microphone on? Okay. I'm Jorge, 31 years old, originally from Mexico, currently birthday in New York since a few years ago. I work as the advocacy officer in Agora. We bridge the gap between grassroots activities, organizations, and decision makers at high-level spaces. We have a program called SDG Ecosystem where the organization Agora supports NGOs, companies, public institutions as well, to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals, but mainly to unlock international funding, because that's what we lack as young people, resources, funds to implement the activities that we want to carry out. And I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful, thank you speakers. We're so honored and excited to have you and hear your insights. So starting off with a broader question, why do you think that a gap persists between global youth policies and efforts, including the WPAY and YPS, and the reality for young people on the ground? We can go down the line.
So I think there's a huge disconnect between the reality that youth are living in and these policy documents that for a lot of people just live online. I think the UN released a report this year that no one is reading UN reports. I think it's something like 95% of UN reports only get downloaded like 100 times or something like that. The young people that I know are resilient, they're scrappy, they're being resourceful, they're taking action immediately based on what's in front of them. Most of the young people that I know are not sitting and looking at massive policy documents and figuring out how they can align their small grassroots project with these massive policies. In order to make that change, to me, it needs to be more accessible. It needs to be more understandable for your everyday young person. I think a lot of the ways that these policy documents are framed are in a way that is exclusionary of regular people who just care about making change. I think we are all in this room here because we are people who care about these topics already. We're interested in these topics, so we already have a level of understanding that is beyond your ordinary young person who may just be in their community going, hey, there's a problem in my community and I want to fix it. And so the question boils down to, how can we as young people really take charge in how we communicate about these things to our fellow young people and not allow these blockers to get in the way of our own ability to create change. That progress is progress, and the more that we grow in what it is that we're doing and the change that we're trying to make, the more we can strengthen that policy as we grow and as we build and continue to create impact locally.
I love that. explanation because I'm a firm believer that baby steps are still steps. Like, as long as you're advancing, as long as there's progress, there's something that's gonna generate a positive impact down the line. One of the biggest divisors that I have seen has been mainly resource-wise, and I'm not just talking about money, which is a great factor. I mean, the United Nations is not even paying its interns, which already generates a level of in which only a certain group of privileged people can access the spaces of specialization, of in-depth knowledge. Sometimes understanding a system from an academic viewpoint, it's very different from understanding a system from within and how decisions are made within and how core action makers will go into the negotiation tables and what aspects they will consider and what not in order to make decisions that impact us all. Most of this time, these negotiations or these talks end in a single nice paper that would be kind of like a nice letter to Santa Claus with no material, actionable accords or movement. There's also the level in which, as digital natives, most of the young people right now was born into a world where there was already internet access. And we live in echo chambers. The algorithms will repeat our own cognitive biases to us. We will not be exposed to different ideas, different cultures, different societies, different viewpoints. And that will generate both, on one hand, extremism from our own ideas, which we have to be very critical, even though we're passionate about them, but also will generate a disconnect between people who have different issues. Because when we perceive human rights, we perceive them as a single matter issues, and human rights cannot be understood individually. Human rights are both interdependent and indivisible. What does this mean? If you affect one human right, you will affect the other inevitably. For example, a child, a young person who's passionate about maybe gender equality that cannot access school will not have professional opportunities because they cannot receive an education, and maybe they have a medical issue as well, they will not be able to fully access the education that they do have access for, and it becomes kind of like a snowball effect. It will roll down one human rights affection into another. So there's that element as well of dissonance between intersectionalities and vulnerability issues. And finally, there's a matter of misinformation. Sometimes we perceive these issues as mainly and only political. They are political in nature. Everything that's personal is political. Everything that affects our day-to-day lives is political. But there's also a very real, very technical element to human rights matters, to peace building, to security elements, that if we do not understand and do not bring to a grassroots level dialogue, conversation, language, accessible, and responsibly and ethically communicated, because there's again a lot of misinformation out there, there won't be able to be a coherent progress between people creating communities within different spaces in order to advance in the greater range of human rights perspectives.
Thank you very much. So, growing up as a student of economics, I got the opportunity to study development, study political economy of development. I've seen how these policies are being made. I've studied with keen interest, how they're being formulated. But truth be told, over time, till date, some of those policies that I studied as an undergraduate student in my university back home in Nigeria are still on paper. They are far from being reached. But truth be told, these young people we're talking about are not in documents. These young people that we're talking about are young people seated in classrooms that are not preparing them for what life holds outside the comfort of the classrooms. These documents are made for young people that ordinarily in most countries are not being part of the formulation. They're rather being given these policies. These young people are young people with lots of ideas in their communities that lack access to funding. These young people are young people with lots and lots of ideas that are being told to wait for their turn. Like in my country, it's a normal thing for you to be told to wait for your turn. But the reality is, from Namibia, I was in Namibia in August for the Commonwealth Consultative Forum, to Amsterdam, to here in New York, we have young people with ideas that can turn things around. My colleagues here talk about, the disconnect in terms of policy and as well as resource constraints. I would like to take it from the perspective of short-term political circles. In my country and in most countries in the global south, we find out that the turnaround time for political office holders is too short for these policies to be translated into reality. Not only that, we look at the structural and socio-political barriers, talk about issues of corruption, talk about inequalities, talk about limited access to resources by these young people, talk about young girls not having access to education. All these factors directly go on to impact how these policies are actually implemented at the grassroots for young people. And it's in as much as efforts are not being put into curtail all these factors that we mentioned of, we're still going to talk about it many years after this. It's 30 years now, and if we don't come together holistically to ensure that an intentional approach is being put forward, we will continue to talk about these barriers.
Yeah, I think this is very phenomenal questions, and I hear very amazing stuff from previous speaker. I think just kind of add on to Isabel's point is, I find it very difficult for young people to thrive in the world of radicalization, with extremism, with fabricated narratives, with propaganda revolving around social media. And believe it or not, if you go around the classroom, ask what is your primary source of your information access in everyday life, they'll tell you Twitter, they'll tell you Instagram Reels, and that is just terrible things because you're being locked in your own echo chamber, and that exacerbates and that proves what the politicians, like what political workers, the political professions want you to hear. I think to add on to the previous point is, I think there's also a lack of the gap between transparent policy submissions. Most of the policy submissions I'm seeing currently in every country is basically partisanship, so there's not much available transparent policy channels and interventions and that kind of integration process for civil societies, for other policy interest groups to incorporate their policy progress in the decision-making table. There's a lack of connection between young people and the policymaker, how we communicate, how we market our policy ideas. A lot of these revolves around elitism. I think my policy, my ideology is better than your party, right? So I think as a young people, you find yourself apathetic to change, to bring up your ideas because nobody says you listen. Another thing very important to talk about is decolonization conversations happening. We're living in institutions that are still post-colonialism. There's lots of subjugated minorities, and there's minority groups, vulnerable groups that are being forced, assimilated to part of that progress. For example, for Canada, the Indigenous community, right? So for that kind of conversation to be open, we need to be mindful, what are the tools? What are the language that they speak? And how do we create a transparent system to bridge the gap between the government policy procedure with the general youth capacity building?
So yesterday we speak with Saji, about the youth peace and security agenda, the topic that I focus on. And I was impressed that he didn't mention anything about the initiatives that youth implement in the frame of the YPS agenda. He focused on the Global Coalition on YPS, which he co-chairs, although as an outcome of the Global Coalition on Youth Peace and Security, we have different examples, initiatives being carried out by young people, either at the regional, international, local level, and I can speak about two examples, and also considering the participation about the need to learn from each other, share experiences, understandings as well, about the ideas, the perception that we have about the world. The coalitions, either at the regional or country level. In Canada, there is a Canadian Coalition of Youth Peace and Security, and they collaborate with authorities. It's a civil society group in order to implement the Youth Peace and Security agenda. And the Arab League also has a coalition on youth peace and security, the MENA coalition on youth peace and security, and we want to see those initiatives in more regions, in America, in Asia, although unfortunately, I think the efforts have been focused on the politics side, like increasing youth participation in decision-making spaces, but not necessarily on the funding, right? So if we lack resources to implement those projects, no, and resources meaning capital, no, in general, like people, money as well, no, institutions backing up your projects, then it's impossible to implement anything about the WPAY's agenda, right? So in the upcoming minutes, I can also talk about the innovative financing mechanisms that exist to support youth in peace building.
Wonderful, thank you all for those insights. I appreciate it, yeah, the insights on how policy and conversations and bodies need to be more accessible to youth and, you know, have youth at the forefront of these charges and being open to other viewpoints and, you know, taking action, but also keeping in mind history and potential constraints and working to overcome those things. Jorge, I wanted to touch on some of what you were saying, and also other speakers as well. We talked a little bit about funding constraints and the limitations and the gaps between international governance and actual young people. But in order to address those, what kinds of support or training do young peace builders and leaders on the ground need most from the international community to make their initiatives and peace efforts feasible?
Somebody else want to go first?
Yeah, we can start. Yeah.
So I want to ask, no, like, what does it mean to participate in decision-making spaces, to travel, no, to forums, to the UN, to COP, etc., in order to be able to speak with authorities, no, to have a dialogue, a conversation with decision makers. Although without money, it's impossible to travel, right? So we have an initiative called Fund for Participation at Agora, where we coach youth, mainly, but maybe we can think about expanding the focus, no, towards women, vulnerable populations, to reach out stakeholders, sponsors, in order to cover their travel expenses, accommodations, etc. And that's what we need, no? Like, it's a shame that this initiative was implemented, envisioned by civil society, when the UN agencies, the missions, no, the ministries, the governments should be implementing these activities. So that's the example that I can give.
Would anyone else like to touch on this?
Okay, if I may add here to what he said, I think I will build on the current initiative that I'm working on in my country, which is about connecting young people to local and global opportunities, which we call the Opportunity Summit. It's about giving young people access for them to be able to understand that there are these opportunities that are open for them to access, to develop themselves personally and professionally, and for them to be able to reach a wide network of people that can, help them to build upon their ideas. Is it in entrepreneurship? Is it in leadership? Is it through education? They want to advance their education. They should know that there are global opportunities. For example, we talk about the Shortening Scholarship that allows you, to travel and study in the UK, and lots of other opportunities that are open to young people. I get to tell them that I'm a product of opportunities. I had the opportunity of meeting President Barack Obama through an opportunity, which is the Mandela Washington Fellowship. So if I can be in Nigeria and have access to these opportunities, which readily gives you the platform to expand and communicate your ideas to a global audience. And not only was I in Nigeria, but through such global platforms, I was able to get funding for my initiative. Like in 2022, I got the IREX, US Department of State funding to execute a project for internally displaced people in Nigeria, which is to show you that it's a global village, and if young people are connected to these opportunities, they leverage on them and they go back to impact their communities.
I would also love to introduce some of the work that we're doing in NATO Association of Canada and how do we converge the young people generation with the broader defense and surveillance and security education. So 3 things that we did. The first thing is we introduced civic courses. We designed online courses. We have our armed force members discussing how and what Canada's role in international society in mediating and facilitating international peace and peace building efforts. What are some of the gaps between decolonization and these conversations, right? So, which this is actually inspired by this one time when we went to a university and we introduced ourselves as NATO, and they refer us to the math department. And that moment, we're surprised at how little people know about these organizations, these international organizations and alliances that keep us safe, that keep us at peace. And within the transatlantic region, another thing that we did is we utilized campus resources. We give the young people back to Young NATO. We help them set up their own clubs, help them set up their own initiatives. They can host their events, invite Armed Force, ministers, member of parliament to their clubs to discuss about policy interventions, provide policy submission, platform for them to uphold, and as well as submitting their own policies. We also hold Canada national-wide events. We cross-collaborate with other hubs around the world. We bring international organizations' resources back to grassroots, back to municipal, back to the city, back to what matters to Canadians. So that's a few efforts that I would like to share with everyone.
What I would mainly focus on is understanding what different organizations and institutions are there for. So a lot of times there's a lack of information, as it was stated right now, of what each institution is for. I used to work in government as well as part of my activism work took me to work in government in my local state congress. And I would sometimes get asked by people or organizations things that were not part of the work that was specifically allocated to the state congress. It was maybe for the federal executive branch, or it was maybe an issue that had to go through litigation, through a judicial channel. And that's in local level, not in an international context. But if it's hard sometimes to understand even how a country works and which authorities we should head out for, then in the scope of international organizations, it becomes even harder. People confuse the ICC of arbitration with the International Criminal Court. They have exactly the same name. They're both courts. They see very different topics. There's the United Nations. A lot of young activists believe the United Nations is the end-all be-all. It's a great institution. It's a great organization. It's mostly diplomacy-based. It's there for nations to discuss, to dialogue, and to go into agreements. It's not there necessarily just as a stage for activism. It's a great stage for it, but it's not its main purpose. There's maybe other international stages where that activism can have more power that we simply do not hear of, do not search of. And therefore, this lack of education of the adequate channels to go through sometimes limits our exercises as young people in peace building do. A lot of times, for example, in international organization participations, you have to go through your own government in order to have access and participate. You need your government to select you as a representative to come showcase what's happening in the country. What will the governments do? Choose people that will speak maybe small issues, maybe greatly of the nation, and that's okay, because many nations do good things, and that's what diplomacy is for patting each other in the back. However, there's sometimes where actually grassroots activism are uncomfortable to the government, and the government does not want those voices out there in the international stage, which makes it harder to get those opportunities. For example, the movement in which I participated as an attorney, Un Río en Río, which is this economical project, greatly affected the projects that my state government had at the moment in building first a road, then it was a metro, then it was another, then we're arguing security issues, because security was gonna come and flood the river, and the trees were gonna help the river flood, and we're all gonna die. These kinds of projects or movements, where did they gain most attention? It was not in the United Nations, because our government would not have wanted us to go there. Completely contrary, our governor came to the United Nations to speak about such a great job that he was doing as a state governor. What we had was a young woman from our group, one of the great leaders in our movement, because it's a movement, it's not an organization, it's come from many different associations, mainly youth associations, called Andrea Villarreal. She made a documentary series in English that was pushed for by National Geographic, and it gave so much interest from an international context, because it was made in English, language access. It's a privilege in and on itself, the fact that we're sitting here being able to dialogue in a language, English for many of us, it's not our native language. We had to learn. Second, she got the resources from people she knew would have a keen interest, social interest in the activity we were pursuing, environmental protection. National Geographic, it's all about the environment. It's not an international organization like the UN, but it has the people who have the context, the knowledge, and the social power to spread these voices. And third, knowing how to communicate effectively these ideas. When we have strong held beliefs and strong held projects, it's very easy to lose ourselves in our passions. And we forget that people maybe don't speak the same language that we do. And it's not language in the sense of Spanish or English. Language in the sense of technical words, of context. We don't know what experience or background the receiver of our information comes from. Maybe I have to backtrack and explain why the environment protection is actually a human rights matter. Maybe I have to backtrack and explain how even when mobility is also a human right, limiting it in the scope of environmental matters is an excess on granting another additional human right. Sometimes we need to take a step back, be able to internalize what we're saying, and be able to say which are the groups of action that have actual interest in hearing us, what's the correct stage, what's the correct audience, and how can that audience help me pressure the specific group of decision makers, because sometimes it's not even the government who make these decisions, sometimes it's people behind the government. Who do I have to find, who do I have to talk, and who do I have to convince in order to create this material change in society? That's what we have to focus on.
I don't know what anybody's upbringing was like growing up, but when I was younger, I have a big extended family. And so when we would get together for family gatherings, I would have to sit at the kids' table. And I remember being a kid and looking at the adults' table and being like, when I turn 18, I'm gonna move over to that adults' table. And I was watching, I'm one of the younger cousins, I was watching my cousins graduate from the kids' table and get moved on to the adults' table. And then when it became my turn, I didn't want to go over to the adults' table. I was having too much fun at the kids' table. And so at the kids' table, I stayed. And me and some of my cousins around my age, even as we came into adulthood, we stuck with our kids' table. And one year, one of my aunts came over and she said, I'm gonna sit with you guys this Thanksgiving. And she came and she sat with us, and now she sits at the kids' table every family gathering. And I think what we've seen in the international community with young people is, we can jump up and down and yell and scream, we need to sit at the table, we need to sit at the table. We got tired of it, we built our own table, and it's not lost on me that we're speaking to a room full of young people, mostly young people right now. It is really hard to, one, get invited to the adults' table. I find it even harder to get people to come and sit at the kids' table. We run a program called Camp 2030 every year. We bring 200 young people to upstate New York, and we spend a week innovating, ideating, creating new solutions to the SDGs. We do this big pitch competition at the end. We bring all these big fancy judges, and all over the email briefs, we say, please, please, please stay at the end for networking. Please, please, please. Our young people would love to get an opportunity to get feedback on their pitches, to talk to you. And every year, 90% of them leave before the networking. And I am so angry every year because I'm just like, if they only knew what they were missing out on, they could be learning new things, they could be engaging with some of the most cool, badass young people in the world, and they're choosing to leave. But I have to remind myself, you know what? All you need is one. You just need one champion, my aunt who sits at the kids' table, who's gonna be a champion for our kids' table, because she thinks we're cooler and more fun and more interesting and more creative and more innovative. You don't need to bring everybody over to your table. We just need to find the right people who are gonna sit with us, who are gonna listen to us, and who are gonna advocate for us. It doesn't have to be the entire international community. You just need one champion for your work who's gonna really, really, really fight for you. And I know I'm speaking into an echo chamber of young people. What I really need to be saying this to is non-young people, to say, be a champion for a young person. Come and sit at our table, give us an hour. We'll show you all the things that we're working on and all the impact that we make. Can you help me, and can I help you? We also have things to offer older generations, stakeholders, we have things of value to give to them. We just need to allow them into our space to be able to show them what we have to offer. And unfortunately, we do have to work a little bit harder to do so, because we are newer and we're young and there's stigma around that. But we talk about all the time the importance of intergenerational dialogue, but that is not a one-way street. That's not give us a spot at your table. We also need to do the same. And if they're not paving the way for us to have a seat at theirs, we need to pave a way for them to have a seat at ours.
These are great answers. As a young person myself, I can vouch to the importance of funding and educational opportunities and conversations and accessibility of policy and conversations and a seat at the table for sure. You brought up intergenerational conversations, which was actually something I was going to touch on. And I was going to ask you all how intergenerational conversations can be leveraged to ensure the wisdom of experience and the innovation of youth can be transferred into these work and these policies, and also how in circumstances where there might not be trust or there might be divisions, how can you build trust amidst those intergenerational conversations to create space for dialogue and make policy change happen?
I'm gonna make two book recommendations, which I've read recently and have helped me navigate this context a lot. One is Navigating Polarities. That's specifically about navigating opposing values or opposing viewpoints and how to be able to balance that context in a conversation, in a negotiation, in a context of polarization, which I find the tools it gives you a mind map in order to navigate these ideas and set the values and be able to pinpoint where you're at in the conversation and be able to manage. The other one is Getting to Yes. It's a book about negotiation. I wrote these two books because I don't want to make these ideas my own because they are not. But essentially because it's important to know where the other person stands from and where one stands from. So for example, a polarity can be change and tradition. We value tradition to a degree. That's what brings us culture. That's what brings us history. That's what brings tradition in many of our countries and are elements that we respect, love, and adore. But there's also a need for change in a lot of elements. Some things are lost in the past. We become subjects of government policies made by people that are long gone even, not even the people who are older than us right now, but people who died centuries ago, who drafted our laws, who drafted our constitutions. We become followers of ideologies from very long time ago. So how do you balance this change and this maintaining tradition by understanding the values and principles behind the conversation and discussion? So what do I want to say with this? If you have a tough conversation with someone who's simply locked in the idea that things have always been like this, and we can progress, but not in the way you're saying we can progress, is being able to open up and say, what are you worried about losing if we progress? What are you hoping we can gain if we progress? And what are the elements and paths that we can follow so that you don't lose this element that you're so careful about maintaining, but also how do we gain these elements that we as youth can see so presently that we need? Because we're not the future. I hate it when politicians say, I'm here with the youth, the future of our people. No, we are your people. We are the present. We're living right now in the moment. And the decisions that they're taking affect us exactly right now. A lot of us are of legal age within our countries and can vote, and some of us can even be elected people in positions of power in our government. But we're not given these spaces. We need to open the spaces, as was said. But we also need to be able to open the conversations, the hard conversations, in a very civilized manner, in the way that I'm not antagonizing, I'm not making an enemy of you. I'm making you part of the solution. And by bringing you to this discussion, I'm keenly interested in knowing what are your fears in case of change? What do you not want to lose in this conversation if everything goes south? What does your experience tells you? Sometimes they participate in action similar to what you're trying to push, and maybe the exact same path you're following is one they tried and failed. Why did it fail? How can we change that result? Those are the conversations we have to have with them.
I would also love to speak on more of a digital solution on the technical side. I think it's important to identify the tools that get people primary communicate and the primary information and access that they receive in everyday life. I think it's also important to identify the ethnic and geopolitical nuance. Especially personally, I've been working in person parties for around 5 years. And what I think that we do is we identify demographics and what ideology do they prefer, how do they prefer to communicate, what system do they use, what are the ideology and the background they grew up from, what country they came from when they first landed in Canada or the United States. So I think it's to understand the language, the system, to bridge the gap between the understanding of politics of the everyday people, the public opinion of the everyday people, to a more elite and political scientist or a politician, the way we understand the world.
You go.
Okay, I'd like to take it from the lens of shared value creation, particularly in terms of knowledge sharing and reverse mentorship. In my country, for example, we have a renewed hope agenda that the government is pursuing, and now more than ever, we have the presence of young people in the space of governance. Many young people are not given the opportunity. Why? Because they come in with lots of youthful dynamism, they come in with lots of innovation, digital literacy, and ideas, while the older ones, they have the wisdom, they have the policy ideas, they have the experience, and they get to shape the space and give the right guidance to the younger ones. I have like some instances where I can set some examples. For we have the National Youth Service Corps, which is the largest youth government-owned agency in Africa that is based in Nigeria. It mobilizes graduate youth from tertiary institutions for 1 year national service to the country. It was established in 1970. After the Civil War, it was for rehabilitation, reconstruction, and rebuilding of Nigeria. That scheme is 50 years old, and it has had it has played a very, very important role in promoting unity and national development. But the government have come to realize that it needs to be revamped for it to move with the existing dynamics of young people. Currently, a board has been set up, and it's comprising of young people, middle-aged people, and the older generation. So this is the intergenerational conversations we're having. How do we ensure that the scheme is being revamped, but it's not being done without the people that it's meant for? Young people are there to bring in their ideas to say, this is what works today, because what you adopted the other day is not working, or what you adopted the previous time is not working. The youths of today, they're eager, they're fast, they ask lots of questions, they are not afraid to speak. So the policies that you brought forward for them maybe 20, 30 years ago, it's not going to work today. And we have them in the council, we have them contributing to policies that are going to shape their own narratives moving forward.
I think there are two core things that shape our view of the world, and those are our lived experiences and empathy. And, you know, when we talk about intergenerational dialogue, our ability to empathize and ask questions of other generations that are not our own are going to not only shape our own worldview, but also shape the worldview of those to come, because we are not going to be the young generation forever. There are going to be generations under us. And so by strengthening our ability to empathize and to understand and to ask questions, what is your experience like being a person in the world today? A person that has friends, family, customs, life experiences, things that have happened to them, good, bad, ugly. Our ability to take that in and to understand that and make sense of it is going to be what carries on this intergenerational dialogue and understanding beyond right now. And that is critically important. It's all well and good to sit in a room around a table with people and have a discussion, but unless we can empathize with them, we're never gonna meet somewhere at some point in the middle. And so I just encourage you all, learn how to ask questions, sit down with your grandparents, talk to somebody on the street, ask questions, and that's gonna really strengthen our policies and our future town.
Yeah, well, I would conclude by saying that having these dialogues, no, conferences, forums, coalitions where we can discuss, learn from each other is important. But the ultimate goal in peace building, from my perspective, looking at both the WPS and the YPS agenda, is to come up with national action plans, no? Documents, policies that commit authorities to invest first and implement activities, efforts in order to make, to build peace, no? To realize the youth peace and security agenda and the women peace and security agenda. So we have a few examples of national action plans in the world, I think 4 or 5, out of the 193 countries. So we definitely need to continue investing, all that we have, the efforts, the energy to make that happen.
Well, that concludes the end of the session. I can confirm that I learned a lot and gained a lot of value from hearing your stories and insights and experiences. And I would like to thank these speakers for taking the time to be with us and sharing more about their perspectives on the World Program of Action for Youth and the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. Thank you all, and thank you to the audience as well. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you so much, Jaya, and all the panelists. It was incredible to hear all of you and your insights. We will start our next session in around 4 minutes, but in the meantime, if you're having any issues with your mobile app, iOS mobile app, and if you're missing any sessions, then you can sign in. Please go up to the front desk and they will be able to help you out. Thank you.